A very good evening to you and a warm welcome to Business Today on Channel I, your weekly business show where we give you an in-depth look at today's business landscape. And we do have a very interesting topic today and a personality who can tell us more about this topic and about business itself. So before all that, it's time for us to head into the personality team. Well, today on Business Today, we will be discussing the work done towards improving our global standings related to investment and doing business, as well as legislation and processes targeted towards developing the corporate sector and how to make Sri Lanka an environment friendly for the investors as well. So we have a personality who can tell us more about this and give us an in-depth review on what's happening in the country right now to make this an environment friendly for the investors and people to do business. So let's have a look at who our personality is this week.
Attorney at Law Shamir Zavahir is the Coordinating Secretary and Director of the Justice Sector Reform Program of the Ministry of Justice. Shamir Zavahir is an attorney at law practicing in the original and appellate courts of Sri Lanka. He had his primary education at Trinity College, Kandy. He holds an LLB from the University of London and was also a triple gold medalist at the Sri Lanka Law College. He convened the National Law Conference in 2017 and the IT Committee of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka in 2020. He lectures public law at the Centre for Professional Studies, Colombo, and is the Coordinating Secretary and Director of the Justice Sector Reform Program of the Ministry of Justice.
So we do have Attorney at Law Shamir Zavahir with us this evening on Business Today to talk more on how to make Sri Lanka an environment friendly for investors and also for everybody who's looking at doing some business here. And very good evening to you.
Good evening, Sharifa.
And we are honored to have you here with us this evening on Business Today.
Thank you.
And first and foremost, before we get into the main questions, which we kind of previously discussed on, it would be about the pandemic situation and about reforms being made in terms of making it comfortable for the people out there to have a comfortable living. So before all that, let's talk about where do we stand in terms of the legal framework and what do we strive to achieve?
So basically, Sri Lanka has perennially had a problem of what is known as laws delays. We've spoken about it over and over for decades, which is on a very basic definition of it is things take time. Court cases take a lot of time in this country. I mean, decades sometimes. Testamentary cases sometimes take a generation. Now, this problem of things taking time, it's not alien to any Sri Lankan. I think anybody who has had a experience with litigation never comes out of it happy. So the entire gist of the Minister of Justice when he took over last year, his main vision was to fix this problem of laws delays, and with that he put the Justice Sector Reform Program out. So this program is basically a very wide-ranging, all-inclusive approach to reforming the system as a whole.
So this would be an overall reform.
Exactly. So there's never been a targeted reform of the justice sector before. Every consecutive government in the past has attempted to sort of fix little areas here and there, but there's never been a sort of a look overall. So it is that idea that led the Justice Sector Reform Program that is currently being done by the ministry. Now, just to give you a quick background of the program, the Minister of Justice, Mr. M.U.M. Ali Sabri, President's Counsel, is a practicing lawyer, so he was very aware firsthand as to these issues. So when he took over, one of the first things he did was he went to Cabinet and got an approval for this special project unit and the appointment of 5 subcommittees: civil law, criminal law, commercial law, digitization and infrastructure. as well as increase the funding for the justice sector reform from 4 billion to 20 billion, which is the largest ever increase. So this reform program is a comprehensive approach with very structured, targeted view towards it. So that is what we are trying to achieve, a sort of sector-wide improvement to not only infrastructure, but also to the laws, the processes, everything.
So this certainly would take time, isn't it?
It should actually take time. You can't, Rome wasn't built in a day, but you can't sort of see overnight changes.
Exactly.
But for this past year, we have had a remarkable number of improvements we've made, and we've mostly refined the processes involved to speed up how quickly the reforms happen. So at any given time, there are, I think last count we had over 300 lawyers working on the program. So it like I said, it can't be done overnight, but there's a very remarkable amount that has been done, and that is happening even now, and that will continue to happen.
What's the estimated time frame we are looking at for this whole thing to be completed, or maybe at least to a certain extent?
So the entire reform, I don't think you can ever say that the justice sector can fully be reformed 100%, like the requirements of society and the law change with the times. But the main purpose is to identify some of the core areas. So there are 5 subcommittees which were appointed, and they are given a 2-year time period at the outset to sort of come up with short-term, medium and long-term reforms. And within that, there are lots of advisory committees, 20 plus, who have very short 3-month mandates. So some of the reforms we are looking at have a very short turnaround time. For example, the Coronavirus Act had a very short turnaround time for a new piece of legislation. So the entire process will take a couple of years, but it's not that we keep the progress to the end. It's a continually achieving milestones, which is what we are doing.
Exactly. And you mentioned previously that there are many reforms in progress, and there are some reforms which have been completed so far relating to business as well. So that's what our main topic would be today, because this is Business Today. So we would like to talk on everything which is comfortable for people doing business in the country and for investors. So you did mention about the Coronavirus Act. So since this is very timely, let's touch on that first. Tell us a bit more about what this Coronavirus Act is and how it would be helpful for the business personnel here.
Right. So the Coronavirus Disease Temporary Provisions Act, we call the Coronavirus Act, was an attempt to balance out the scales in favor of the people who are unfairly prejudiced because of the pandemic situation. As you are aware, due to the lockdowns that were present, people were unable to file cases on time, people were unable to take steps on time, people were that is just with regard to court processes, but in day-to-day transactions, contracts, people were not able to perform certain contractual obligations. Now, in the absence of a law that gives it relief, the person who breached those obligations would have no other respite, or even a person who couldn't do something on time in a commercial litigation, he had no other respite, and he had to sort of suffer the consequences. So the COVID-19 Act balances the scale to the extent that it brings in the provision to allow courts to look at the situation, look at the lockdowns, look at whether the people were affected in performing some sort of contractual obligation.
So there is a specific criteria for them to be eligible enough to claim this?
Well, you can make an application to the court on the basis that due to COVID-19 and the relevant circumstances, there's a definition of what a COVID-19 circumstance is, that you were unable to perform this act or perform this obligation or carry out this contractual duty. And the court is then supposed to look at it and see whether you can be given an extension of time to perform that obligation. So it is a very wide-ranging act which gives relief to a lot of people. Now, in addition to that, businesses also, a lot of litigation with regard to money recovery and commercial litigation even gets held up in courts because of the lockdowns. So, the Coronavirus Act has two provisions to deal with that. One is the sort of automatic designation of the geographically closest location, and the second is remote hearings were brought in. So, the gist of it is that firstly, if you are a litigant who has or if you are a person who has due to the pandemic not been able to perform a duty or perform a task and you have been affected, this act gives you the sort of relief that you require, which was not there in the law before.
Yes, and let's also touch on small claims court
Right.
and why this was put forward.
Okay, that's a very good question, because now if you take your average claim for money, now if you go to the district court of Colombo, you will realize that there are a lot of cases, and these cases range from a value of 600,000 to 700,000 to millions to hundreds of millions, I mean depending on the situation, sometimes even the commercial high court. The problem is there are an overwhelming number of small claims, credit card claims, small loans given by companies, banks, people who have small transactions that they haven't been paid for. Now, these take an extremely long time to settle, because district court action typically involves a plaint, summons taking time, an answer taking time, leading evidence, documents. So, the small claims court attempts, if it's the current proposal, if it's under 1.5 million rupees, the claim, there will be a separate court with a faster expeditious procedure to get this money back. So, businesses and finance institutions and even people with small claims will benefit immensely, because you will have a faster process, you will have a separate process, and the law will also have provision for the minister by gazette to change the threshold. So, it can be an evolving process depending on what the small claim is. So, this is very similar to some of the other countries that have adopted it to make recovery of money in commercial transactions faster.
Since you touched on the topic of other countries, but where do we actually lack in terms of the court procedures happening in other countries? And obviously this is a reform and we're working on it.
Right.
But when it comes to small claims and all that, how does it work in other countries?
So
is it the similar format where we are trying to head into?
There are standard claim courts in some countries, they are called. Some countries have adopted this method very successfully to sort of make the process on documents alone, and filing affidavits and filing the documents without this arduous process of a long drawn out legal battle challenging simple documents. So, it is because of this efficiency that in those countries that there has been an uptick in recovery of small claims of money, and we are very aware that one of the key factors in business is the ability to resolve your dispute quickly.
Exactly, and this will be very helpful for people who deal with day-to-day issues and people who are not high-end, I would say, or maybe doing small businesses.
Very true. It gives you a level of confidence in the justice system, because sometimes if it's a small claim, I mean this is a very common story, you will spend more on the lawyers and the process to recover a amount of money than you did at the end of it. So, it makes no business sense.
And some people don't even complain because of that.
Exactly. So, the act will hopefully, well, the act is proposing to also allow a person to sort of abandon a portion of the claim to bring it within this small claim amount, so that they will look at it from a business angle and think, okay, I am going to spend X amount to recover this money, and then it makes business sense to go after it, because very often, sometimes for smaller claims, businesses look at the time, the amount spent on the recovery and think it's not worth it. So, we want to take that away. We want to make the justice system work for everybody. From the
exactly, and this would also motivate people to get into business.
Very true.
So, since we touched on small claims court, let's also touch on the investment disputes high court as well, and also about the establishment of the court to resolve high value investment related disputes.
Right. So, that stems from the fact that sometimes there are big claims in our courts, and these claims take time because the court is held up with other claims. Now, there is this example I can give you, where a person with a 100 million rupee claim might have to wait for hours in a courthouse till somebody with a 1.5 million rupee claim finishes his case. I'm not saying that the law should discriminate, but if you want to attract good investment into this country, if you want people to come and think, okay, Sri Lanka is a place that I want to put my money, you need to give them the confidence that if something goes wrong,
it will be solved fast.
It will be solved fast. So the investment disputes, the High Court, the investment court is to give a level of safety and comfort to an investor, where they feel, right, I'm going to go into this country with this money, or even within the country. If it doesn't work out, I have a dedicated courthouse or a very fast system to get this money back and resolve it.
So that would certainly attract more investors into the country.
Certainly, I think it's vital that investors are comfortable and happy with our dispute resolution mechanism.
So what about people who have to claim higher amounts? I mean, Sri Lankans who are not investors. How about the courts for them?
Right. So the thought behind that is that if we fix the justice system's approach to your standard courthouse, standard litigation angle, which is to make summons faster, to make the case itself faster, then the public will also be happy to come and litigate. So the investment court is not to say that the rest of the system won't be fixed and we are only going to treat the investors nicely. The rest of the system is going to come up to that standard as well. In the meantime, we want to assure the investors that you will also be protected under the law.
Right. So this would basically be given prominence initially so that we can attract business into the country, while the other systems are also being reformed at the same time.
Exactly, because this concept of high value transactions getting a separate court is not new. Now, if you take the commercial high court, the commercial high court has a monetary threshold of a high value.
Right.
So the investors being given a high threshold with specific criteria is only adding to the expediency of the system. It's not sort of taking away from the existing expediency.
And Shamir, there are also businesses which rents out, buildings, or they get buildings on rent or lease. So what about special provisions for people like that, a recovery position of premises? Do they, now usually you have to go in the same procedure if you have to do that right now in the current situation, but do we have anything new coming up for that?
Yes. Last week the cabinet gave approval for a new law with regard to the recovery of lease premises. Now, as you are aware, recovering leased premises from a tenant in this country where they don't want to move.
And that's when they have occupied that for a very long time, for a period of time.
Very true. Even if they have occupied it for a short time, once you get possession of a property, the only way to get possession back for the owner is through a district court case. So that can again take years. But this is very unfair on a lessor or the owner of a property. Now you give the property on lease to somebody. And then they refuse to go after the lease is over, and then you have to spend 5-10 years and sometimes pay them money to give your property back. Now, the laws in this country are reflective of a period of time where there was an imbalance between the parties and the landlords were taking advantage. But now that balance has shifted, and as being able to lease a property out and to get it back is important to businesses. Right. I mean, commercial property is not always purchased. So when you have a commercial property or even a residential property and you give it out, you need to know that in the event the tenant doesn't move, you can get it back soon and without a lot of cost. So the new lease, the reforms of the lease law in this country will sort of turn it the other way and at the outset give the lessor the right to get the property back. And the tenant has to show why he should be allowed to stay. So that is the principle behind it.
Interesting. So things are going to get very comfortable for the people here.
That is what we want to do.
And let's also touch on going digital.
Right.
And also paperless, if I may say.
Yes. So the digitization drive of the Ministry of Justice is headed by a subcommittee on digitization and court automation. So there is an overall approach to digitization where there's going to be e-filing and sort of automatic transcription and smart courts and sort of specific time slot for cases. So that is the digitization drive, which is headed by the digitization subcommittee, which is headed by a senior lawyer, Mr. Naveen Marapana, President's Counsel. And in addition to that, the ministry also this week launched its digital signature, one of the early adopters of it, so that we want to move towards a sort of digital future, where even you can apply for documents and you will get a PDF with a digital signature emailed to you, which you can verify. So it puts out the need to go and apply for paper documents for them to be photocopied. It's faster and it's also more secure. So the digital signature has also been
confidential as well.
And it's confidential as well. So that is, the digital signature is also a vital step forward, which we adopted a few days ago, and hopefully we are going to see the adoption of it across the ministry, and it will eventually benefit the public as also businesses as well, because with the adoption on the government side, I think it will be only a matter of time before the private sector starts working with us as well on it.
Exactly, and there are some work which have been already done, isn't it, Shamir?
With regard, yes,
to digitization.
We have already finalized a large-scale plan for digitization, and currently it's in the procurement process, and hopefully within the next few months we will be able to see a pilot project, and we will go towards a sort of a smart court system where a smaller number of cases are heard, but time slots are given. You can check everything online, you can apply for your proceedings online, you can submit your documents online. It's a complete shift in how we are doing business.
And even the youth will be very comfortable on working on this system as well.
Exactly, the youth will be very comfortable working on it, but it's also important to realize that due to the pandemic we've seen the adoption of technology by even the older people. I mean, I think you'll realize that
if you take it in a positive aspect, the pandemic has made a lot of people have faith in doing card transactions and online banking.
Very
which
true.
Is great.
True, we have a generation who is now ordering online, like you said, card transactions, delivery, using Zoom to communicate with their friends and relatives. So it has forced people to go digital to some extent.
And also we've come towards the latter part of the program. So can you quickly touch on the shipping law expert panel, because this also plays a major role when it comes to businesses, isn't it?
True. So there is a commercial law subcommittee headed by Mr. Kaushalya Navaratna, senior attorney at law, and within that subcommittee, there are a few advisory committees that have been appointed or will be. So one is arbitration, there's intellectual property, insurance, company law, banking, and of course, like you said, the shipping law. So some are shipping law, we are an island state, we've got the sea all around. Some of our laws haven't been changed for so long. So the shipping law expert committee is appointed to look at what law needs to be changed, what laws need to be updated, and how they need to fit in to a sort of a modern maritime framework. As the world is moving forward, we need to move forward with them as well.
Exactly, and Shamir, this sounds very, very promising for the investors and also people who want to get into business as well. Thank you very much for enlightening us on what's happening in terms of the Ministry of Justice and in terms of how we could bring this forward to the investors to make it a very conducive environment for them. Thank you so much, Shamir.
Thank you for having me, and have a nice evening.
You too. And with that, we conclude this week's segment of Business Today. Have yourself a pleasant night. Thank you for tuning in.